Welcome, everyone, to our special event to honor Boston Magazine's 2021 Power List of the 100 most influential people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I don't know how I got this gig. All I do is tell jokes for a living, but I'll take it. My name is Kennedy Elsie. I'm the girl part of Carson and Kennedy on Mix 104.1. And I'm just honored to be here with all of you. So today we have an exciting opportunity to hear from a few of this year's honorees in an open discussion about the challenges we face and the strides we're making in the world and in a community that has become more complex than ever before. And our discussion is being broadcast on Facebook Live. So before we introduce our esteemed panelists, I would like to thank Suffolk Construction for sponsoring this event, and Tom Kershaw, owner and proprietor of the historic Hampshire House, for hosting us today. I'm so nervous, I'm sorry. Mr. Kershaw, would you like to join me to say a few words? There he is. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm thrilled to have you here today. Chris Vogel, David Lipson, and Kirk Davis from Boston Magazine. Our panelists, Reverend Liz Walker, I notice is right here. Karen Chen, Liz over here. Betty Francisco, I haven't, there she is, okay. And Manny Lopes. And Damian Wilmot over there, okay. Everett Mayor DiMario. Kennedy Elsie, we've met her. And all of our special guests. Welcome to the Hampshire House. As you can see, we're still limited in our capacity, but looking forward to hosting larger gatherings in the near future as we get back to the first 100% in a few days. 2 years ago, this June, I hosted a gathering of friends and family in this room to celebrate the 50th anniversary of my ownership of the Hampshire House. We would have, who would have ever known or imagined what the next 2 years would bring. We've been fortunate over the years to be a place where Boston leaders and influencers have often convened for important meetings and special celebrations. So it seems very fitting to be here today with all of you to recognize Boston Magazine's list of influencers for 2021. To talk about the future and to prepare for the full reopening of our city. Boston is unique when it comes to the strength of its leaders. We are fortunate to have incredible people working across so many industries and communities, from healthcare to education to public policy to our cultural institutions. As we continue to deal with the many challenges of the pandemic, I am encouraged about the future because of the dedication and vision of our leaders like the ones in the room today. I'm also hopeful about returning back to a more normal times where we can get together often with each other to celebrate this great city. Congratulations to all the honorees and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to introduce Chris Vogel, editor of Boston Magazine, to speak for a few moments about the 2021 Boston Magazine Power List. He's already here. Love it. Love to see him.
Thanks very much, Kennedy, and thanks very much to Tom Kershaw for hosting this very special event here today. I know I was here when we did the 50th anniversary, and it was a good party, and here's certainly to the next 50, that's for sure. I'd also like to thank John Fish and Suffolk Construction for sponsoring the event, as well as George Regan and Regan Communications for producing it, and of course all the panelists here today for being here. As editor of Boston Magazine, it's my great pleasure to present this list each year. And this issue is particularly meaningful after the year we've certainly all been through. This time, the list highlights those who've helped us heal, both medically, like the vaccine makers from Moderna, as well as spiritually and socially. And like our panelists here today, have all helped guide us through the unprecedented events of 2020. I would like to thank the Reverend Liz Walker, senior pastor at Roxbury Presbyterian Church, Betty Francisco, General Counsel at Compass Working Capital, Karen Chen, Executive Director at the Chinese Progressive Association, Manny Lopes, President and CEO of the East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, and Damien Wilmot, Senior Vice President, Vertex Pharmaceuticals, all for taking part in today's discussion, which is streaming live on Boston Magazine's Facebook page right now. To all our panelists, we're very excited to hear all about your thoughts and ideas about where we are and where we're heading as a community. So thank you again for joining us very much. And next, is Everett's Mayor, Carlo dimaria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be here today with all of you. I truly am humbled to be asked to say a few words. I want to thank George and Regan Communications for this opportunity. And Tom, you got a great place here. My name is Carlo dimaria, and I'm the mayor of Everett. And everyone, even Steve Wynn would get my name wrong all the time. No one could get my name right, but even my school teachers would always mess it up. But it's truly great to be here with all of you, and this is a beautiful place. And I want to thank you for providing parking for me today too. That was very nice of you, very kind of you. So good evening and good afternoon, and thank you, Chris and Boston Mag. I'm going to give you a little perspective of what cities and towns were doing during the pandemic. I didn't know what to say today, really, to be honest with you. But I'm gonna let you know what we did. Kind of from the beginning to now, kind of really quickly, so I won't bore you. But again, Chris and Boston Magazine for inviting me to speak this afternoon. It is an honor to be included in an event celebrating such an impressive group of individuals. And I know Manny, I've worked with Manny this past year, and I want to thank them at East Boston Neighborhood Health Center for everything they've done for our residents. I am especially grateful to be able to be here today in person with all of you. Right? Isn't that to be in person again is great. This past year and a half has been filled with ups and downs, and in Everett, we've seen firsthand how long those downs can be. However, as summer begins and the restrictions are lifted, we are able to have hope, but we know in communities all across the Commonwealth, the real work of recovering from the pandemic is just beginning. When the pandemic began last March, I knew that I needed to take action to protect our community, the city of Everett. You know, it's actually, ironically, as the pandemic was hit Italy and my family was being affected by it, I was getting messages about the pandemic. So there was uncertainty and confusion throughout the world, and I, as mayor, made one of the toughest decisions I have ever made. And on March 12th, we physically closed our doors at Everett City Hall and worked with our school system to temporarily close our school buildings. Although we received harsh criticism because we were the first to do it. And I had other mayors calling and texting me and asking me, what are you seeing that we're not seeing? And then later on, as we all know, everyone started to shut down. So I'm proud of the decisions that we made to protect our community. We did this before the Commonwealth and before any other municipality. In hindsight, these bold and difficult choices may have saved the lives of many. In Everett, we quickly became one of the first virtual city halls in the Commonwealth. So the day we shut down, we went virtual. Everything that you did in City Hall the day before, you could do virtually in Everett. Because of these quick actions, we were able to provide assistance and guidance to other mayors around the Commonwealth when they discovered that our virtual model was working so well. I was on the phone immediately with Mayor Walsh, Mayor McGee, Curtis Tone, Town Manager DePasquale, and others, and we organized. And it was I that started those conversations with them and said that we have to be on the same page and work together and be on the same page with communicating to our residents. That whatever one city did, they all had to do, you know, and we did. And it was great. It was great working with Mayor Walsh. I truly miss him. In Everett, we quickly became, again, one of the first virtual city halls. Did I say that? Yeah. Our customer service call center remained open. These individuals worked tirelessly, day in and day out, providing direct assistance and answering constituent questions while giving reassurance that their city was there for them. Our community need assistance with food insecurity, financial assistance, and most importantly, adequate healthcare services. As a city, we quickly transformed our senior center into a robust food pantry to help ensure that no one in our community went hungry. I am proud to tell you that this food pantry is still up and running and is busier than ever. As of today, the City of Everett has distributed over 1.9 million pounds of food within the past year. This pantry serves 1,500 to 1,800 individuals each week. This is truly what community is about. Now we are in the process of finding ways to help continue to meet this need while we return to more traditional service delivery at city government. With many people out of jobs, the issue of housing and security became more relevant than ever. As of today, the City of Everett has distributed $1.1 million for rental and mortgage assistance, with $600,000 on the way out the door this week. When vaccine appointments were scarce and the demand was significantly higher than the supply, the City of Everett opened our own vaccine clinic to serve our residents. The clinic has proudly administered over 10,000 vaccinations to Everett residents. I do want to thank our partners at East Boston Neighborhood Health Center for their dedication to making sure the residents of Everett had equitable access to vaccines. Thank you, Manny. Encore Boston Harbor, a world-renowned resort and casino, has also turned into a state vaccination site. I am grateful for the partnership of the Baker Polito administration, Encore Boston Harbor, and Cambridge Health Alliance to ensure that all residents had the opportunity to be vaccinated. June 15th is 3 weeks away. I'm grateful to be able to look forward towards the future of rebuilding our small businesses, rebuilding our economy, and rebuilding a sense of community. The City of Everett, like other communities around the Commonwealth, is reemerging, and we are stronger than ever before. The City of Everett was recently named one of the top spots to live north of Boston for 2021 by the Boston Globe for the second year in a row. This is not a coincidence. Living costs, infrastructure, accessibility to the City of Boston, and a welcoming community are the main contributing factors to this recognition. The summer of 2021 will be a time for community growth, unity, gathering, and quite frankly, the normalcy we have all craved. On behalf of the City of Everett, I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to hearing from our esteemed panelists. Together, we have and we will continue to persevere against this virus. I wanted to try to be quick. That's why I rushed through, because I didn't want to take too much time. But again, it's an honor for me to be here, to be with so many esteemed and well-respected people in the City of Boston that do such great work. I truly just like being part of the team. So thank you very much.
Mayor, your shoe game is strong. I'm just saying. We want to, Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito is out in the western part of the state, so she couldn't be here today, but we want to welcome John Allen on her behalf. Where you at? Say hi. And right now, we'd like to show you a video from UMass President Marty Meehan, also a Power List honoree.
First, let me thank my friend George Regan for inviting all of us to this very timely discussion. To Tom Kershaw for hosting, and Suffolk Construction and John Fish for sponsoring. I also want to thank my friend Chris Vogel in Boston Magazine for its commitment to telling the stories of the new Boston. And here I am at UMass Boston on the campus, and you want to see the new Boston, it's right here on this campus. You see it in the composition of the students. You see it in the new construction. You can't help but come to the University of Massachusetts and be constantly reminded that this is an inspiring place in Massachusetts to live, to work, to learn, and to play. Two things I think are commonly featured in the 100 most influential people. First, we're all honored to be included, but second is their presence on the list is a testament to the amazing organizations that we all lead. The University of Massachusetts has made a lot of difficult decisions over the last year so we could emerge from this pandemic stronger. We graduated 19,000 students last year and also again this spring, adding to the workforce of Massachusetts. We conduct nearly $700 million in annual research which creates innovation. We have a $7.5 billion economic impact on Massachusetts. I believe that the University of Massachusetts is going to help us to emerge from the pandemic stronger than we ever were before. So I'm delighted to participate. Look forward to hearing what members of the panel have to say. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you on economic inequality, racial injustice, environmental degradation, and political polarization. Thanks very much.
Well, as they say, with great power comes great responsibility, and I'm honored once again to introduce to you our esteemed panelists. Damian Wilmot, Senior Vice President of Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Karen Chen, Executive Director of the Chinese Progressive Association. Betty Francisco, General Counsel at Compass Working Capital. Manny Lopes, President and CEO of the East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, and Reverend Liz Walker, Senior Pastor of the Roxbury Presbyterian Church. So I have a couple questions I'm going to ask each one of you, if that's all right. Liz, I'd love to start with you. As an award-winning journalist, you've covered the biggest stories in Boston for over 30 years. And now, as a respected spiritual leader, you get to experience these challenges through a different lens. So I'd like to ask, when journalists and historians look back at this past year, what do you think will be their common theme?
First of all, I'm honored to be here with this panel, and thank you very much for including me. I think of this year as the year of the apocalypse. Now that's a very preachy kind of term, you know, televangelists use that, and certainly one a definition of that is the end times, judgment day. But the other definition of apocalypse is unveiling. And we have been able to witness the unveiling. What was behind the curtain is no longer behind the curtain. The example I think of that is blatant, of course, is the January 6th insurrection. And Van Jones said this is the most blatant example of white privilege we will ever see in this country, when people took on the nation's capital for an insurrection and now are trying to rewrite history right before us. It just baffles me and it amazes me. So that is what I think we have seen. The relentless and traumatic inequity of life and death in America will be the themes that I think we'll have to face here. But the real thing for me, and I end up always on the verge of preaching a sermon, so please forgive me. That's just what I do.
Go ahead.
Is whether we will learn our lessons. Because I've been through something like this before. And maybe not to this extent, but I was thinking about the death of Emmett Till, and that was back when I was in the first grade in Little Rock, Arkansas, and now the death of George Floyd. And these are reckoning moments, but these reckoning moments have happened before. So will we learn our lessons? That's the question, I think, of the times. And I think that might be one of the themes that we come out of this with. Amen? Amen.
And one more question for you to switch gears a little bit. You worked on the Governor Baker's Vaccine Advisory Group. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I worked on the the advisory group for the vaccination distribution, vaccine distribution, with some of the top medical people and scientists and political leaders in the state. It was a humbling experience, because trying to do the right thing can be very complicated and not nearly as easy as you would think. You would think that you would prioritize that the least of these would, but then you have to identify the least of these. And then there's competing descriptions of the least of these. So I think that was probably one of the most transformative experiences of my life. We took a lot of heat, but we really worked hard to do the right thing. I was at, and I won't go on too long, but I was at South Bay Prison today, the Suffolk County Prison. We go there to try to talk to the young people about taking the vaccine. We're still, being met with resistance there. And these people in the jail were saying, well, you used us as guinea pigs because we were among the first. And we worked so hard to make people in prison among the first because they were in congregate settings and they were living close. So we thought that was a good thing. And then you go into prison, they want to bash you because they're saying you're using them as guinea pigs. So to do right is complicated, but you have to still try to do right.
Thank you. Thank you. Manny, I'd like to turn to you if that's right. Speaking of vaccinations, you've been working on the front lines of the state's vaccination plan. So could you share with us some of the challenges you and others have faced and talk about the success of the rollout? Now, 49% of Massachusetts residents have both doses, which is good news. So if you could talk to that.
First, I'd like to thank Boston Magazine, Chris, and others for inviting me to speak on this panel, and as well as my co-panelists. And it's a hard act to follow after Reverend Walker, so I take up that challenge. And of course, Mayor dimaria, who's done a phenomenal job in the city of Everett. It's been great to have you as a partner in this effort. So East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, we've done over 80,000 doses of COVID vaccine to date, so pretty incredible. The team there really has worked extremely hard to make sure that day one or week one, when general population or the 75 plus were available to get the vaccine, that we had 4 sites open in some of the hardest hit communities in the state: East Boston, Chelsea, Revere, South End, and then again our partnership in Everett allowed us to really roll this vaccine out to people who needed it most. Some of the challenges up front were first of all, getting our staff vaccinated as quickly as possible. We knew that was an important resource. Without them, we couldn't do this work. So when the Moderna became available, we were the first to give the Moderna shot. We believe in the country. You know, we're Boston. We want to be first in everything. So we'll take credit for that and say we were the first to give the Moderna shot. And we quickly rolled that out. And we learned a lot from our staff. 60% of our staff come from the communities we serve. So they really informed us in terms of how we can get this message out, what questions they have, things like that. And I'm happy to report over 90% of our staff today have been vaccinated. But we knew we had to build capacity because we had many people who were ready to rush through the door. You remember those days? Trying to get through the phones, the website, et cetera. So we built this capacity to handle the yeses. We knew there would be many of them, and we had to really come at this with a sledgehammer, if you would. But we also knew in our communities there was mistrust of the healthcare system, and many people had a lot of questions about the vaccine. So in addition to opening up these sites, we also launched our education and outreach campaign to make sure that we were getting messages out early and often around how well the vaccine works, answering questions around pregnancy and other issues that people may have. So once we got through the yeses, which was quite a bit of a challenge, I didn't have gray hair before then, we really now trying to focus on the maybes and the nos. And the maybes are the ones who won't go to the website, won't stand on the phone for 30 minutes waiting for someone to answer. You have to go to them. And that's what we've been doing, not only within our local vaccination sites that are well-positioned. Wonderland Ballroom, for those of you who remember the famous Wonderland Ballroom, now called Oceanside, is right on the blue line. Our partnership with the Collaborativa organization puts us in the heart of Chelsea, so we made sure that was easily accessible. But that wasn't enough. We had to launch with some of our partners this mobile pop-up sites where we can go into the heart of these cities, we can go to the large employers and get as many people vaccinated as possible. And now today we're dealing with the no's, right? The hard no's, which we've been dealing with since the beginning. But now we know these are individuals that need really personal attention. And our strategy there is to do that in our exam rooms. Since we are the largest provider of healthcare in our service area, we have high penetration rates in these communities. We felt that this is a great opportunity for us to put the vaccine in the exam room, hopefully give individuals an opportunity to ask some of those private questions, meet with their primary care team, and hopefully get them to that yes.
And do you feel like you're going to get any resistance when we start talking about boosters?
There's a lot for us to learn around boosters, and we're waiting for the CDC guidance around that once it becomes available. But from our perspective, we do over 100,000 vaccines a year. This is pre-pandemic, flu shots, et cetera. So we're going to treat the booster like any other vaccine. and hope that people every year, if it's necessary, to come in, get their flu shot and get their COVID-19 booster shot as well.
I'm no scientist, but I say we combine the two.
That would be great. We've done that before.
Thank you so much, Manny. Appreciate that. Damien, if I may turn to you. So we stand here on the 1-year anniversary of the killing of George Floyd. And the topic of race relations became right in the forefront. And you saw this as a calling to aggressively dismantle systemic racism. Can you share with us the actions that you have taken?
Yes, and thank you for the question, and thank you for having me here today. I appreciate that. Immediately following the murder of George Floyd, I think it certainly struck a personal chord for me, as I'm sure it did for all of us in this room. And I think it, Reverend Walker talked about it sort of, reminiscent of Emmett Till's murder, and just how horrific that was. People saw the images of Emmett Till in his casket. And I think, and obviously it sparked the civil rights movement as we know it today in this country. I thought in a different chord that was struck with this was in corporate America. And I think it was just really interesting, the discussions that were going on in boardrooms and in the paneled walls of these companies around what can we do as a company, or what should we do something, and what can we do around this issue. And I think we were probably all having those discussions in our companies in a really different, unique way that I've at least never been a part of. I hadn't seen that in a corporate setting in that way. And so that led for a lot of companies to just do a lot of things around these issues. A number of companies made commitments. You saw a lot of statements from CEOs. I wanted to do something a little bit more than that, and not just I, but me and a lot of my, frankly, friends. Boston. One of the benefits of the size of Boston is our ability to network really well in this city, in the connections that we have to each other. Me and some of my friends just start to call each other. Our peers in other companies, and this was a Black and Latinx sort of executive group that just start to make phone calls. And our thought was, our companies want to do something around this. We want to do something around these issues. We think that we should. And we thought we were just uniquely positioned, given our position in our companies, in the companies that we're at this point in time, to really marshal those resources and sort of band together to tackle some of these issues that we're seeing, the issues that led to, in part to George Floyd's death, his murder. So we literally just started to text and call each other, and maybe within 2 weeks after George Floyd's murder, we gathered on a Zoom call. And that group grew to about a size of 19 different Black and Latinx executives around the city. One colleague here in the audience, Betty's husband, and I've been spending a lot of time together over the last year, sort of talking about these issues and what can we do about them. And so the early discussions were around, what we're seeing in policing, and just the fact that for Black Americans, they're 4 times more likely to be killed by an officer than white Americans. We're talking about the impact of COVID-19 on these communities, that in Latinx communities, they were dying at a rate of 3 times that of white Americans. So we're looking at all that sort of data. And one sort of interesting data point, and Betty speaks about this often in her own work, was around philanthropy. And you look at Boston, very little of the corporate philanthropic dollars leave the city of Boston. Much of it, maybe because much of the money's here too, but a lot of it stays within the city. So very little of that is making its way into, say, Brockton or New Bedford or some of these other neighborhoods. And a fraction of those dollars, when they do make it out of Boston, go to Black and brown sort of initiatives or communities. Another interesting fact, 2 cents of every philanthropic dollar even makes its way to a nonprofit that's led by Black or brown leader. So we're looking at all that information and thinking, we're uniquely positioned as leaders in this community to ensure that we can actually help, dismantle, and we took this on as a really ambitious mission in dismantling systemic racism in our Commonwealth. And we thought we were pretty uniquely positioned to help get funding to some of these groups that are doing this work, and not just in Boston, but across the Commonwealth. So that was sort of the first part of it. We also thought, given our access to capital, to frankly other leaders, thought leaders, government, academia, et cetera, we could actually help open doors for a lot of these groups and sort of help them not just build in, say, capacity to take on more activities, but just their impact. How can we help them to build an impact? And then I think the last piece was, how do we build an ecosystem in the Commonwealth to dismantle these issues? So we're sort of narrowly focused on 3 pillars. I say narrowly, but they're pretty broad. But it's education, economic empowerment, health equity, and policing and criminal justice reform. And so we're focused on those 4 pillars as a group. We've been working on this for about a year and building this model and the strategy around it. And I'll wrap it up. But the things I think we've been able to accomplish, one has been getting funding to a lot of groups that many of us in this room have not heard of, that are doing some really impressive, important work. So we're making sure they're getting the funding. But also just building that ecosystem and pulling the stakeholders to the table so we can sort of attack this issue together. So corporate partners, government, again, academia, the data, et cetera, pulling all that together. It's been a second job for many of us, so it's been a ton of work. We set an ambitious goal of raising $100 million towards the effort for over many years. We've raised over 30 million to date, which has been great. And we think we're on our pathway to 100. 30 million in commitments over 3 to 4 years. But we think it's important and necessary for us to do this work at this point in time. And we think we could actually make an impact, make a dent in these issues. So that's what we've been up to for the last year, all by Zoom, by the way.
Wow.
Which has been phenomenal.
Can you speak to the new Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund and what we can see there in 2021, the remaining part of the year?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
The Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund and what we can see for the rest of the year there.
For the rest of the year, we're still, I think, we're about to do some grants in the short term to many more groups. We did a round of grants back in November. We see us doing a few more rounds this calendar year. But I think a big focus is to grow that tent. I mentioned there's sort of 19 leaders in this at the moment, and our companies are supporting the effort of many, many other companies. But it's important for us to expand the tent and make sure, we have, we pull in many different leaders, thought partners, et cetera, into this effort. And I think if there's another big focus, obviously the fundraising, we're doing a lot around that. And frankly, a lot of listening, because I think what we've been hearing from a lot of these nonprofits is that a number of groups come in and tell them what they need or what their communities need to sort of be successful. We want to spend some time listening to what they actually want and what they need to sort of be successful. So we're doing all of that work. It's been quite the effort. But we feel like we're actually making a dent in this, which has just been energizing. And to do as, we're on Zoom calls maybe 3 or 4 times a week for a year. But I don't think this group has lost an ounce of energy around this issue.
Awesome, David, thank you.
Yeah.
So Betty, if I might move to you. Small businesses have been amongst the hardest hit. We've all watched places that we love go away and know that they're not going to come back, especially those in underserved communities. So you took action to elevate small businesses, especially female entrepreneurs, which we love to hear. Can you tell us more about your work?
Absolutely. And again, I echo the thanks to Boston Magazine and to Chris for having this panel, but also for one of the most diverse lists that we've seen so far. So thank you for that. So small businesses, we know that Black, Latino, Asian small businesses were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, by the closings as well. And so one of the things last year that we saw was, when the shutdowns began to happen, many of the Black and Latinx businesses in particular didn't know what to do, right? They were scrambling. They didn't have a lot, in terms of reserves or savings. They were trying to just figure out, what do we do with employees? Do we furlough them? Do we lay them off? So the need for guidance and technical assistance was immense. So a group of us, I also, at the time, I was with Compass Working Capital. By the way, I started a new job last week. I'm now with a social impact fund called Boston Impact Initiative. But at the time, I was with Compass. We were helping some of our clients that were small business owners, and then Amplify Latinx, which is focused on growing economic and political power for Latinos in Massachusetts. So seeing Latino businesses that I was working with didn't know where to go. They needed language accessible materials. And then they also were unsure, how to navigate all the rules around closings. How do you come back? How do you reopen? And remember, we all thought we could just go back in 2 weeks or a month, and then it just kept getting expanded. And so that need for guidance was tremendous. So started to get together with the Foundation for Business Equity, with BECMA, Black Economic Council, LISC, and MACDCs. These are organizations I didn't really know much about. They were local on the ground, groups helping small businesses. And we started to come together around what can we do to help support. So started doing calls. We raised, with the Foundation for Business Equity, raised about $1 million very quickly for COVID emergency relief grants, specifically for Black and Latinx businesses that weren't getting any other support. Then when the second round of the Paycheck Protection Program came out, because remember, in the first round, it was mostly large businesses that got access to the PPP loans because they had banking relationships. They were able to access that monies very quickly. But our smallest businesses, the Black, Latino, Asian businesses, could not get access. They didn't have the relationships with the banks. They didn't even know how to apply, or weren't even eligible to apply because of some of the ways those businesses are structured. So an initiative, again, came about with these organizations. So we ended up with 45 local CDCs, community development corporations, CDFIs, 5 banks, including Berkshire Bank, Leader Bank, Eastern Bank, MCCI, and others, that started to come together and say, let's provide immediate support for PPP loan access. So we put up this very scrappy effort quickly. No worries, that happens all the time to me. I turn mine off. So put up this effort to try to help these smallest organizations to get access to technical support so that we could help them apply for these PPP loans. Anyway, long story short, over the last 2 rounds of the Paycheck Protection Program, we've served almost 2,800 businesses, helping them to apply, right? These are businesses that don't have the language access necessarily. They're so tiny, they weren't initially eligible, right? Because they didn't have payroll. And so part of the work we did was advocate for increased access to these loans, showing why, how to change the program so that it could reach more businesses. So served 2,800 businesses, about 800 did end up applying for PPP loans, and we're able to help them access $11.8 million in loans, which is awesome for businesses that are tiny. And then out of those efforts, we started to listen to what the businesses needed. And they said, we don't want any more loans. We want grants. We need cash. We need customers. We need to reopen. And so the group of these organizations started to advocate to the governor, and we were able to, I will take some credit, right, to say that we were able to get the governor, who responded immensely and quickly around a grant program for small businesses, which initially was about $50 million. And then in late December, he announced $687 million. It's the largest grant program for small businesses in the United States. Massachusetts did that, right? And that program prioritized, again, because of the efforts of all these organizations, prioritized businesses owned by people of color, by women, by veterans, And so 47% of the grantees in that program were women, 43% were minority-owned businesses. So again, when you prioritize, right, when you focus and you're intentional about who you want to reach, you can do it. And then the last thing I'll say about the efforts is we saw tremendous collaboration last year among organizations across the state that frankly had not really worked together before. And out of this effort has formed a coalition. It's called a Coalition for an Equitable Economy. So far, we've commissioned 2 reports around how do we create a equitable small business ecosystem focused on entrepreneurs of color. And we've issued 2 reports already with MassInc and the Boston Foundation. The last report last week was on the color of capital gap, and it shows that there's a $550 million gap in access to capital just for entrepreneurs of color. If we were to close that, if we were to create more access to just capital, we would start to create larger businesses, employer businesses that are Black and Latino owned. So there's tremendous opportunity going forward, but we have to collaborate, we have to work together, we have to intentionally invest in these businesses. And our goal as a coalition is to create economic opportunity and parity for these businesses by 2030. That's only 9 years, right? So imagine the type of work that's going to be needed to do it. But I believe Massachusetts could do that. So thank you.
And just one more question for you. Speaking of diversity and inclusion, what are some of the most impactful things other companies can do to bring in that diversity and inclusion?
Well, again, I think it starts with intention. It starts at the top, right? It starts with the leadership, and it's a strategic priority. So it can't be, oh, because everybody else is doing it, it's a thing of the day. We should start to think about it. Frankly, I think it's something that we need to remain competitive in Massachusetts. So what some companies can do, right? One, what do you do when you strategize? What do you do when you start a new business line? What do you do when you want to go into a new market? You create a plan, right? And so that's the first thing that I would do. That's the first thing that I've done in other organizations, including on the boards that I serve on. Last year, 2 of the largest employers that I've seen that I'm on the board of have created really robust diversity plans and decided to make significant investments in implementing them. So that's, not just hiring a chief diversity officer, but putting a significant budget to the effort, right? Because it takes a lot of work to first start with how do you recruit diverse talent? How do you retain diverse talent, promote talent? And that's just the talent part. There's also the rest of the impact that a corporation wants to have in its ecosystem, right? So what are you doing externally? So, your organization, for example, and the many groups that are in the New Commonwealth Fund have devoted significant investments to the fund, but also to community, to supporting small businesses, right? To buying from small businesses. So they've increased, again, supplier diversity efforts. We need that. We need corporations to buy from local small businesses. And then I would say, the most important thing is planning, transparency, reporting, setting benchmarks and goals around where you want to be. And for me personally, it's not just about your diversity numbers, it's also about the employees. Do they feel included? Do they feel they can be their best selves? Are they getting promoted equitably? Are they thriving in your organization? And when you start to look at those most senior levels, right? Are they reflected? Are they there? And do they feel like they have, a say in decision making? So a lot of the things Compass did last year and many other organizations was because we're all on Zoom, we shifted to town hall formats, right? Where everybody has input. Like this was new, right? Where before you were making decisions as a senior team, now everybody could weigh in and everybody could, last year was pretty traumatic for many of our employees. And they said, we've never seen an organization allow us to talk about what's happening. So another piece was being able to discuss the impact and the trauma of George Floyd and the other issues last year. So creating spaces and environments that allow for that. We also launched a Latinx and Black affinity group, which for us, small nonprofit, but we did that. And again, really valued by the staff. So we listened to what they wanted and implemented that.
Thank you. seems like listening is a big through line today. That's pretty amazing. Karen, if I might speak with you. So President Biden last week signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act into law, which is aimed to protect Asian Americans after a year-long series of violent attacks. Do you believe such legislation will curb the dramatic spike in violence we've seen over the past year?
So, the violence against Asian Americans is not new to our community, but I think finally, we are having like spotlight on these issues that, people face every day. And I think that, signing the bill itself, I think it sends a strong message to the public, to people, that hate crime is unacceptable. Any sort of race-based bias crime or any identity-based crime is unacceptable. And what would actually curb the violent crime, we really have to think about, how crimes happened and how crime prevention could happen. Because just signing a law may not necessarily, prevent the crime itself. And I think that, like many of the panelists said earlier, a lot of, problems that we see in society, it's actually rooted in the community. Everybody is an expert, has a PhD in their own lives. And everyone in the community, is the expert in the community. So we have to make sure that we look to the communities for those solutions and really making sure that they engage and involved throughout the process. And, there is, money in the bill actually that actually goes to community, to law enforcement. And I think there's some guidance on, how to work with community around awareness and then also, improve in reporting. Because I think probably almost you talk to anybody in the AAPI community, reporting is the problem. Even though we see it on social media, but if you actually look at data, and there is not a lot of data and information on that. So we have to start from that and not start from, harsher crime. And we have learned that doesn't prevent crime. So I think that we have to look into the communities, what the solutions are. And I hope that the funding will really, truly go to community-based organizations and work with the community together to come up with those solutions. And, and I think that, within the AAPI community, it's been really tough. And then we have been seen as mostly invisible. And I think that also the wealth gap within the AAPI community is very wide. And so we have to really take those things into consideration when we are thinking about how do we address issues. Because I think that some of the crime or some of the societal issues, it's really, rooted in, socioeconomic inequality. And if we can address those questions, we can't just pass the hate crime bill alone. We must address some of the long-term issues, like housing stability, right? We have to address, unemployment and underemployment. We have to make sure that there's real access to the healthcare system. Just like we're talking about, like mental health issues. It's not just providing mental health services, but actually, if the stressor is around housing instability, then we need to provide people with housing, not just healthcare.
And you were talking a bit about housing stability and how difficult that has been during the pandemic for the Asian community. Can you share some of those challenges and what you've done to assist families?
So the housing crisis, and particularly in, communities of color, has, really existed before the pandemic. The pandemic only exacerbated. So Chinatown, like many other communities of color, like we fought, in the last, 100 years or so, right? Highway expansion, institutional expansion. In a community, when an institution expands, the community shrinks. And because there's fight over land, there's only so much, right? And then luxury development, like Chinatown in the shadow of all these luxury housing in downtown. And then more recently, short-term rental, influx of short-term rental in Chinatown. So I think what happens to people in the community is that people are squeezing into smaller units. You have a three-bedroom apartment instead of having, a family. You have 3 different families within it because the housing rising costs. And then unlike, people who are moving into the neighborhood, right, with a lot of resources, people actually live in neighborhoods like Chinatown out of necessity. People have no choice because grocery, doctors, social service, all becomes an issue when you uproot them to a different community. So people don't like, oh, Chinatown's so nice now, we're gonna move to Chinatown. No, it's not like that. Actually, a lot of people who squeeze into these apartments live in Chinatown out of necessity. And, lots of people needed unemployment, access to employment. I mean, we received thousands and thousands of calls from workers who needed unemployment. People were getting eviction notices, not necessarily a written notice, but verbally, and there's a lot of parents who actually have, on one hand, they can't go to work. On the other hand, they have all these kids at home trying to use the internet. But yet, every time you go online, the teacher requires you turn on the camera, you turn on the camera, the whole system shuts down, And then, so some people have grandparents nearby, they can send to the grandparents' house or separate the kids to different families so you can actually go to school. So there's a lot of layers of issues that working families are dealing with. Some people may say, hey, you're actually getting more money in unemployment than when you're working. That's an important question for to think about. Why is that? Why is that? And should it be that way? Does us talk about, something about how wealth is distributed in society? So I think that, but I think that with this, when we're going into recovery, it's a really important time for us to really think about, to set the tone, what the next 10 or 20 years will look like. When we're investing in communities, we need to think about not just building individual wealth, but think about collective wealth that's rooted in the community so that the people who make and build the community have a stake in the future. So we should invest in things like community, land trusts, co-ops that actually help people achieve economic mobility. Thank you.
All right, before I bring Chris Vogel back up here, I just want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you. It was so nice to meet all of you today. It was an honor to stand here and be in this space with you, and I learned so very much. So thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it. So Chris Vogel, I'm going to bring you back up here to close us out.
All right, thanks everybody. Me again. First, I just want to say a big thank you to Kennedy. I just also want to echo what you said about thank you to all these panelists. I can tell you I've been to more than a handful of these type panels and so forth over the years, and this is far and away one of the more memorable and powerful. So thank you very much. And then once again, of course, thanks so much to Tom for providing and his staff here at the Hampshire House for providing this incredible facility here for us today, and John Fish and Suffolk Construction for their support. And of course, everyone at home who's watching this on Facebook Live, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be sharing this again on our social media channels very shortly. And sort of last for me, believe it or not, we've begun gathering string on our 22 list already so far. So we look forward to getting together again next year with all of you and all of our valued readers at home. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Can't thank you enough. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.